I wanted to welcome you all to the Naloxone training today. It's brought to you by an organization called the Steve Rumler Hope Network. My name is Justin McNeal. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also a person who's in recovery from opioids. I've personally responded to over a dozen overdoses in active use, and then also at a part-time job I have at a homeless shelter in South Minneapolis, where there's a lot of overdoses happening. And so in recovery, I have real-life stories that I'm going to tie into this. Show of hands of who's heard of Steve Rumler Hope Network. Anybody? Well, a few people here, right? So they're the state's leading provider in overdose education, awareness, advocacy. They're the reason why we're able to have this and it's legal to carry. There's something out there called Good Samaritan laws that protect us during overdose, and we're going to get into that in a minute. They were really big at getting that to happen. So just as something as few as 15 years ago, this was illegal for us to carry. Now it's perfectly legal to carry, perfectly legal to respond. Today we're going to be learning about a couple different versions. So we have a nasal version that just squirts up someone's nose. I'm going to show you how to use that. And we have an intermuscular version where we fill little vials with these syringes, using a new syringe each time. And it's going to go intermuscular, not into veins. You will sometimes hear of a third way that naloxone is used, and that would be an IV. And that would be if you've taken so many opioids that no matter how much of this you're putting in someone's body, it's not lasting. And so when you get to a hospital, they would actually hook you up to an IV saline solution with naloxone to do that. Show of hands here who has experience with overdose. Ever seen one, ever witnessed it? What about knowing someone who's overdosed, right? Usually when I do a big training, almost everyone raises their hand. So we call it degrees of separation. How many people between you and a person that's overdosed are there? There's actually like 0 degrees of separation now, where someone knows, almost everyone knows someone who overdosed, or a family member or a friend. And it's because overdose is the leading cause of accidental death in our country, killing just over 100,000 people a year. And so that surpasses gun deaths, car accidents, anything that's accidental. This is number 1. And then if we talk about people who are incarcerated coming into the community, or the ages of 15 to 19, there's statistics out there stating it's the leading cause of death for them. So number 1 thing killing people, not accidentally, period, just killing people, is this. And it's predominantly because of drugs like fentanyl. Call them synthetic opioids. Anyone ever heard of this drug? So 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. And then they have another one called carfentanil that they're using for the little blue pills that they're pressing that is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. And so I don't have a pen on me. If I were to show you, a lethal dose of heroin is about the surface of a dime. A lethal dose of fentanyl is the tip of a pen. So if I just had a pen and click the tip out, that little tiny metal piece that pops out is a lethal dose of fentanyl. And carfentanil, which is 100 times stronger than fentanyl, grain of sand. And what's really scary about this drug is it's being cut with whatever people are finding and using to fill it up. Because if you were to just try to give someone this much and say, use that and don't die, they more than likely overdose, is that they're cutting it with stuff, but it's not cutting appropriately. So in one bag of drugs, I may take a dose from the right side and a dose from the left side, exact same size. This one over here kills me, and this one over here is a perfect high. And so it's just not mixing right. Fentanyl's been around for a really long time. Normally it comes in a patch that releases through your system over 12 hours. The stuff they're doing is they're ordering it right from Mexico, or China, and they're putting all the parts together and then making themselves, and there's no rhyme or reason. And so they're not, pharmacologists, and so they're overdosing. And what's really scary about an overdose is when someone overdoses, they have no idea it happened. One minute you're fine, the next minute you've overdosed. And so if you try to use alone, which most people do, that's why people are dying, is they're using alone, there's no one there to revive them. If you always use with someone and they're with you, watching you, and you have this medication, the likelihood of you having a fatal overdose is very low. Now the problem is getting people to do that, because you cannot Naloxone or Narcan yourself. And so you'll hear some names. Naloxone is the scientific name for this medication. You normally hear it when it's a syringe version. If you ever hear the word Narcan, that's a pharmaceutical company monetizing it. And so that's Narcan is the nasal version. They're both naloxone medication, just naloxone, Narcan, just 2 different names you may hear. And so, I talked a little bit about the opioid overdose crisis that we're in. Right now they're calling it a crisis because over 100,000 people are dying a year. It kind of happened in 3 waves. It started with the overprescription of opioids such as OxyContin. They were actually marketing it as non-addictive. actually saying that it could not get addicted to it. It would be good for toothaches, headaches, muscle aches, you name it. They were prescribing it. Turns out it was more addictive than any other opioid prescription ever made. And people, what happened is they got heavily addicted to it, and then their doctors pulled away their prescription. And so that created the second wave. People started buying their pills on the streets. They couldn't afford that anymore, so people moved to using heroin. We went from pills to heroin, which created the second wave, and now we're in the third wave, which they call the fentanyl crisis, because now fentanyl is everywhere. And to paint a picture, if I set a 5-gallon bucket on this table, that's about enough to kill the entire city of Minneapolis in one 5-gallon bucket. People are, why is everyone using fentanyl now? Think about how much easier that is to get over a border through a shipment. So quite literally, a 5-gallon bucket of fentanyl would be pretty close to equivalent to an entire semi or something like that of heroin. And to make heroin, you got to grow a poppy field. You've got to harvest it, break it down, clean it, do all these things where you can just mix a bunch of chemicals together and make a synthetic like fentanyl. And now, it's wild, me being an opiate survivor, or opiate use survivor, is I don't even hear about people being able to find heroin anymore. You can't even find it on the streets. Everything is fentanyl. And what's really scary for people is, especially even here in Anoka County, over 60% of our overdoses are actually people using meth. So people get meth, and then they overdose on fentanyl because it's contaminated. People are cutting it into meth. They're cutting it into cocaine. They're cutting it into Molly and other club drugs. Very often when kids are buying pills, they buy them online, they think they're getting a Xanax, an Adderall, some other type of thing that's not supposed to give them a high like fentanyl, and it's a fentanyl pill. 8 out of 10 pills are fentanyl pills now, even if they're marketed as something else. And so what this is doing is it's creating a crisis for anyone who's experimenting with substances. So back when we first started using and we were experimenting, it usually wasn't a death sentence. Pretty strong death sentence for people, especially kids, if they get a hold of a pill that has fentanyl in it, especially their bodies being smaller too, being much harder to process something so strong. When we used heroin, when I was using it, we would smoke it on tinfoil, and it would gradually get you higher, and the idea that you would overdose would be very, very small. Now people take one hit of fentanyl on tinfoil and they're overdosing, dying, right on the floor. And so it's just showing you how strong this is, and it's so dangerous because you can't even experiment with other stuff. And so what's scary, why they're doing this is so you become dependent on it. If you use an opioid for 3, 4, or 5 days, you actually get a physical withdrawal symptom if you try to stop. You get really sick, you crave the drug really strongly, restless legs, diarrhea, constipation, feeling so terrible that you would use the substance you're trying to get off of to feel well. Best way to put it too, it's very similar to how when people try to get off alcohol and they get shakes and they get withdrawal symptoms. Opioids is very similar to that. And so, what does it look like when someone uses opioids? When an opioid hits your system, it's a downer, so it's going to make you feel down. You're going to be sleepy. A lot of times people are just nodding off. If you're driving by an encampment, you may kind of see people acting like zombies, stumbling like this. Very common one, which is wild to me, is this lean back thing, you know? Where people are like this and they catch themselves right before they fall. They're very, very high on opiates. You try to wake someone up, they're mumbling, they're a little coherent. They're just really, really high. You can look at their pupils and their pupil is almost non-existent. But usually that's the telltale signs is this groggy voice, this slow demeanor, this hard to wake up, constantly falling out. Pretty good sign they're on an opiate. And then when that gets a little bit further and they get into overdose, it just gets a step above what we talked about. So that drowsiness, you're unable to wake them up. You're literally grabbing someone and shaking them lightly, moving their head around, you're saying their name, and they're not responding. Sometimes they do a really weird snoring thing if they're sitting up. It's this loud, erratic snoring, and you're shaking them and they're literally not waking up. You don't slap them, you're not going to punch them. It doesn't help. Is you try to gently wake them up, maybe a sternum rub, and they're completely unresponsive, more than likely an overdose. Some other telltale signs. Their pupils, like I mentioned, shrunk to nothing, and then they're going to do a whole lot of weird breathing stuff. So gasping, gurgling. That could be if I just sit down in this chair because I passed out in a compromising position like this. You can already hear it's harder for me to talk. Big reason why there could be gasping and gurgling. They could have had some trauma, because let's say I'm smoking something right here or injecting something, and then I overdose, I just fall out. right over to the side. I might hit my head on a table, a toilet. So there could be some head trauma, really hard to wake up. And then one of the really freaky ones is color discoloration. So what happens when someone overdoses is your body's ability to breathe. You forget how to breathe. So what happens is your breathing gets slow and shallow, gets more and more shallow till it eventually stops, which stops your heart and stops your brain. And so what happens in that process of your body being starved of oxygen is you start to change color. Depending on what ethnicity you are, what the color of your skin is, it's anywhere from gray to purple, usually a gray or bluish kind of color. Very scary. I've walked up on people on overdoses and they literally look like a Smurf, bright blue. It's because they're starved of oxygen. Rule of thumb is the more color discoloration, from what I've noticed when I've responded to overdoses, is the longer they've been there without oxygen. If they just started to get into overdose, it'll start at their fingertips, the inside of their nostrils, inside of their ears or their lips, and then it spreads out. I always try to tell people you have time when you respond to an overdose. Just get in the motions of doing what you have to do. If they've changed a lot of color, you're going to have to act a little bit faster just because that means they could have been there for a while. And I think it's really scary is if their eyes start to glass over and they're blue, they're getting really close to death because that's another sign is just this distant look. And I always say responding to an overdose and doing it successfully is one of the most terrifying and fascinating things you'll ever do. On one hand, it's terrifying because this person's life's in your hands, they're almost gone. But if you successfully revive them, just seeing someone from almost dead to alive in a short 10, 15 minutes is just a wild thing to see. And so remember to try to keep yourself calm. Very common reaction for us as the responder. The first couple times you're going to be shaky because of the adrenaline. You don't realize it, especially being in recovery. When I was high and doing this, it was a little different. When I was in recovery, you actually have to debrief with someone afterwards because it's a lot to handle. It can bring up old memories for you if you were a drug user or you lost friends. You know, I know every time I respond to an overdose, I think everyone I've lost so many people in my life to this that I think that's why I'm so passionate about doing these trainings. I do them every week. We're in a crisis right now that can be very easily averted if everyone was trained and carried this medication. And so that's an important segue is there's a law out there called Steve's Law that protects you when you respond to this. It makes it 100% legal to carry, whether it's nasal or intermuscular. No matter how much you have, you can carry it. 100% legal to respond. And let's say I respond and someone gets harmed from my rescue breathing. Someone gets harmed in a way where I wasn't able to revive them and they passed away. I am not subject to, I have criminal immunity, civil and criminal immunity. So the family can't sue me, the state can't sue me. The reason they did this law was because people were leaving people to die. So the laws before Steve's Law were the police could charge you a second-degree manslaughter or attempted manslaughter. So you would respond to an overdose and maybe you were using with the person, maybe you weren't. They'd come after you criminally. And so when someone would overdose, let's say you overdose, sir, the rest of us would leave you. And so people were getting left to die. People were getting dumped off outside of emergency rooms instead of brought in, kind of like you see in the movies. And so they created this law to turn that around, and they did it all over the country. So almost every state has a Good Samaritan law. The rules behind it vary. Ours is called Steve's Law. And so now we have laws that protect us. Bring people in the emergency room. Call 911. If you call 911, you're protected, and the person who overdosed is protected. And what I really like about this law is it protects the drug user. So if we were in active use together, or you and I, let's say, and you overdosed, if you had up to 5 grams of any drug on you, and so did I, the police can only take them. They can't arrest me. And if I was on felony probation and you were on probation, and technically that would get me a probation violation, I can't get a probation violation for my PO because I was responding to an overdose and saving a life. And that's why we're doing this. We create these laws and we give you civil immunity for some drugs and stuff like that so we don't leave people to die. When I was in active use, I actually responded to an overdose. The cops came and they took my drugs and then they left. And I didn't know about Steve's Law at the time and I was so blown away. I thought I got one up on the police. I'm like, they just didn't pick me up or throw me in. And then in recovery, I found out about the rule. And so we're going to get into the actual how do we save a life. If I miss any information, you have any questions, stop me. We can answer questions at the end. We're going to learn intermuscular and the nasal version here. Just know this stuff will freeze. You keep it at room temperature. In the wintertime, don't keep it in your car. So I keep some in my backpack, at my office, in my car, all over the place, so I have some. If it does freeze, these vials, you can put them in your mouth for 1 minute and it'll thaw it out. The nasal stuff has to sit out for about a half hour, 45 minutes to thaw out. It can freeze and thaw out multiple times without barely losing any efficacy. They actually found a paramedic van in an environment where it froze and thawed out that had naloxone in it. After 30 years, it only lost 1% of its efficacy. Sunlight can damage it a little bit. That's why when you get your kit, it comes in UV bags. And so room temperature, be mindful, it has a 3-year expiration date, yet it never expires. Medications are required to have expiration dates. If you're working for a company or working here at Recovery Cafe, recommend you keep up-to-date stuff for insurance policies. As a community member, you can have expired stuff. You don't get in trouble if you give someone expired stuff. When we talk about the kits, you see them in bags like this. They've got a QR code that will take you to Steve Rumler's website, give you a ton of information. And they also have a thing on there called Naloxone Access Points, where here at Recovery Cafe, you're one, that purple thing at the entrance with all the naloxone in it. That means that anybody can come here anytime, no questions asked, when your hours are open, obviously, and get naloxone. We're at Begin Anew one as well, and they have a map on their website, and so if you run out of this stuff and want more, you go anywhere on that map across the state, you find the closest one to you, you just walk in and say, hey, I need more, and they help you, just so you're aware. Each kit, so if we're talking about nasal, it's going to come with 2 of these. And these are the nasal versions. These are $20 a piece. You're going to get them free through the Steve Rumler Hope Network. If you were to buy them over the counter, they made nasal naloxone over the counter at any store where you can buy medication nationwide. It also comes with how to reverse the overdose in 4 different languages: English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. And then each one has a little breathing barrier, which is once you tear it open from a little piece of plastic like this, it's just got a cute little face on there so you know how to do it, where it goes, it doesn't confuse you how it works. And then obviously gloves for protection, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. The intermuscular comes with the gloves, the instructions, 3 syringes, 3 vials, and 3 alcohol pads. That's to clean up before and after. And so, how this works, whether I have a nasal or an intermuscular, is I have to determine it's an overdose first. And so, remember, I look for the signs: the color discoloration, gasping and gurgling, maybe foam coming out of the mouth. One thing I forgot to talk about is you're going to get some weird breathing stuff. Depending on how long they've been there, besides gasping and gurgling, you may hear someone go, hold their breath for 30 seconds, then exhale, hold their breath again, or you just are listening and you barely see their chest going up or down. It could be fast breathing, it could be slow, just really funky breathing stuff, just nothing normal, because remember, they're forgetting how to breathe. Their brain is not sending the signal. So what happens is you have these opioid receptors in your brain, and they just get flooded, and that's what causes it to the point of overdose. This medication operates on those same receptors, and it comes in and says, hey there, knocks it off, and binds much more firmly for 30 to 90 minutes to that opioid receptor. Important to remember that window, because if someone refuses medical services, you have to keep an eye on them, because they could actually go back into overdose after 30 to 90 minutes. And so I always recommend get them to go with paramedics. And so I look for those signs: the breathing, the small pupils, the skin changing, gasping, gurgling, panting, holding your breath, barely going up and down, any of those signs. Try to shake them, they don't wake up. I always say give them a sternum rub. If they're unresponsive, you can try to put a little bit of cold water on their head. What they did before their medication was available was would put ice packs on people or in bathtubs full of ice. So if you have an ice pack, you could put it in vital spots like the underneath the armpits, the groin, underneath the breast, might flash them awake. I always say if they're really high and you're shaking them and they're responding, do not give them this medication. It puts them into withdrawal, and you are going to be the #1 reason for that when they wake up, or if they come to out of that. So if you're talking to them and they're mumbling and they're still talking, make them drink some water, just stay with them, try to keep them awake. Only want to give this to them when they're unresponsive, because then they know what you've just done, versus they kind of wake up and are confused at first. If they know what you've done, they're going to be really, really crabby. And it's just how it is. You know, it's pretty ungrateful. It's just because people are caught up in their addiction, and we'll get into more what that looks like. So the first step is you got to get to them. So what I say is before I even touch a person, I'm going to put on gloves. Why am I going to do that? Because people who use hard drugs, especially and particularly heroin, fentanyl, risky behavior. whether that's sharing syringes, hanging out with other people that may have bloodborne diseases. You take chances when you're constantly getting high and you have risk in your life. And so, remember, someone could have hit their head. They could have lost bodily function from hitting their head or overdosing. So, someone could have gone to the bathroom. There could be saliva. There could be blood. There could be drugs. I want to protect myself. Another telltale sign it could be an overdose is you walk into the scene and they got a needle tied off on their arm. There's a little black piece of tinfoil on the ground with a bunch of black dots. That's what it looks like when they smoke fentanyl. Or it's like a snake on the tinfoil where they're following this chunk and it's zigzagging. Powder. Know that unless you have a break on your skin, fentanyl is not deadly to touch, despite common belief like you see in sensationalized news articles. I could pick up fentanyl right now, a handful of it, and rub it in my hands, and it would literally do nothing to me unless I had a cut or something in my hand and it worked its way into the blood-brain barrier. So still respond if you see powders there. So I'm going to get to them. One of the first things I want to do is, I want to determine it's an overdose. Sometimes you're going to have to get to them. You're going to have to kick open a bathroom door, crawl underneath a stall, just get to the person. And I usually will drag them somewhere by getting underneath their arms, and I'll drag them and get them flat on their back and tilt their head back so their airway's open so I know that they're breathing properly. I may have to take a backpack off of them, whatever it may be. Then I'm going to check for the signs of an overdose. Once I determine it's an overdose, I'm going to call 911. And so what that may look like is if I'm in a house and there's multiple helpers, I may work on the person. I may say, hey, can you call 911 for me? I may have to do it all together, and that's a little overwhelming. Talking to 911, trying to respond to an overdose, you may have to do that. One of the first things I'll do if it's an overdose and there's people is I'll get a helper. So you're going to help me. And sometimes you may need to say, I need you to give me 6 feet of space, because when someone's overdosed in public, often everyone wants to help and you're crowding a person, and that's when mistakes happen. So everyone give me space, I only need 1 helper. And if you don't have a helper, you're going to do it all on your own. You're going to call 911. They're going to ask you a whole series of questions. Where are you? What do they look like? How long have they been there? Have you given them any medication? Just do your best to answer those questions. Then, once I've got them on their back, if I haven't done so already, I'm going to make sure I open up that airway so that they're breathing properly. I'm going to pinch their nose. I'm going to breathe through their mouth 2 times. 2 rescue breaths before you begin. If you do not want to surprise kiss a stranger, lip to lip, we have this breathing barrier, and you just go through the white area. Pinch their nose. Pinching the nose is super important because otherwise the air will just blow out their nose when you're doing it. No compressions. We're not CPR trained. Just doing the rescue breaths, because why? Brain damage. They've been sitting there without oxygen for a minute. The longer they sit there, the more brain damage, the more likely they could pass away. And so we just start by getting air in them. And then before we do anything else, we get the air in them, and then we're going to administer our first dose. If it was a nasal version, you see how I hold these just like this. This is just a tester one with a spring. There's only about a 1/2 inch sticking out here. All I would do is just cram that up there till my fingers touched like that, and I'd squirt. This squirt's about this high. It's not going to blast them in the brain. A lot of people think that. It absorbs in your nasal cavity. So all it's going to do, even if someone's like, a lot of people ask, what if they have a cold? Still going to work. It just sits there and their head's tilted back and it absorbs slowly. Why I like these is, in my opinion, they may work just a little bit faster, because remember, this medication has to break the blood-brain barrier. Where is your brain when we squirt this? Right here. So it doesn't have to work through much. Versus intermuscular has to go through a muscle up to your heart, to your brain. And so I squirt that up someone's nose, and then here's the equation. 1 rescue breath every 5 seconds for 2 minutes. So what that looks like is, I got this little sheet on their face again. I pinch their nose. I may hold their chin so their head doesn't bobble. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for 2 minutes. Now, 2 minutes when someone's dying and your adrenaline jacked feels like a lifetime. What if you give it to them in 1 minute or 4 minutes because you counted too long? You don't have a timer, or you just think it's been 2 minutes, and a lot of times, like I said, 2 minutes could feel like an eternity, and so you just keep rushing yourself. It's still going to be good. The equation, all the statistics and the data says 2 minutes is the best window. If you wait, if you go too soon or you wait after, it's still going to be effective. It's okay. You're not making a big mistake. Just try to get as close as you can. So if you have a partner helping you, they can count. We have smartwatches. We have timers on our phone. It should be easy to navigate. So 1 rescue breath every 5 seconds for 2 minutes. and then I'm going to administer my next dose. And what we do is right nostril, left nostril, and we keep doing that every 2 minutes until paramedics get there. And that's why the second step is to call paramedics. So by the time you're like ready to be done with this and just hoping the person gets revived, they get there. And the good news is, but if they haven't gotten revived, by the time paramedics get there, they have other means to revive them. The only other way to wake someone up is oxygen. So very rarely do paramedics ever give them more naloxone if you've given them a lot. It doesn't take much to revive someone. It just has to work its way through someone's system. And so they're going to just hook up an oxygen tank or put a tube down their throat and start breathing for them if they're really far gone, and hopefully be able to revive them. Like I said, of all the overdoses I've done, I've been able to revive people. Usually when it's not successful is when someone's been there unattended to for quite some time. And when someone gets revived, it can happen in 30 seconds all the way up to 15, 20 minutes. Same with when someone can die. So when someone overdoses, an overdose can happen immediately all the way up to a couple hours, and then you have a little bit of a window of time anywhere from 5 minutes to a half hour, I would think, where someone could expire in that time depending on how much they've taken. Now with the needle version, it's still that same equation where I start with 2 rescue breaths. I try to wake you up, I determine it's an overdose. That's the first step. I call 911 and make sure you're on your back with your airway open. I give you 2 rescue breaths with the breathing barrier, and then I'm going to inject you. And there's a little more steps with this. And the reason why I'm going to show this today is you have nasal intermuscular here, is that with this injectable version, this is the version you see most commonly on the streets because this is so expensive for most people to get. So we're going to use a new syringe every time. They just pop out the back, piece of paper. And so these syringes, you got to be careful. If I twist, the tip comes off. That's okay, because if it comes off, all I do is twist it back on. You want to pull. And I'm never going to do this game to put it back on because I could stab myself. This is pretty risky. We're always going to do stuff off of a surface where we just scoop it up and cap it when we're done. Basic syringe information. These numbers are milliliters or cc's. This can hold up to 3 milliliters. In this vial is 1 milliliter of fluid. If you were to look at this little window on the back, it's only about a quarter way full. It didn't evaporate, you didn't lose any. This is how much is in one dose. Same with these vials. They got a little orange cap that comes off. Once they come off, they don't really go back on. It just comes right off. It won't fall out, so if your cap's broken in yours, it's not contaminated or anything, it just fell off. Normally these syringes, this one's 1 inch long, are 1.5 inches long. So they're supposed to be longer. Still going to be fine with 1 inch. 1.5 inch ones, you could stab the bottle and it would reach the bottom here, and there's a way you can fill it up different than I'm going to show you. I'm not going to show you today because it will confuse you. There's a vacuum method where I can pump air into this and it will automatically fill the syringe. I can't do that because this tip doesn't reach the bottom, so I'll show you a different way. Also, this tip is about 3 times the thickness of a regular syringe. I could go right through my jeans. I could go right through this jacket right here. Ideally, muscle, big leg, maybe down here if you really couldn't, but thighs, butt, arm is where you want this to go. Intermuscular. So if they have a really fatty butt, you want to try to get it more in a thick muscle. It's the whole point of it. It'll go right through their clothes. You don't have to expose skin. If you do expose skin, great. The only time I ever take clothes off is if they got a Carhartt, a sweatshirt, a thermal, a bunch of layers where this might not get all the way through. And so you just want to be careful about that. And this is going to go absorb through the muscles in their body, into their heart, into their bloodstream, to their heart, and to their brain, to those opioid receptors. So the only way to fill these up with these syringes is you're going to stab the bottle off of the ground or a chair. Never do it in your hand. You're going to stab yourself if you do that. And then I just flip it upside down. And if everyone sees there's a little window on the back of this, you can turn the bottles to the window so you can see the needle in there. And then all I do is I've just pulled that syringe to the edge of this silver cap right here. You see how I'm shaking it and moving it around and the bottle isn't dropping back down? That rubber stopper holds it right in place once I get it to where it needs to be. I don't have to hold this at the same time. So now where it's at, all I do is I just draw it out till all the fluid comes out. Now, one thing that you guys should remember as well is if I were to try to just fill this up Now that the bottle's pressurized, it's a little different. If I were to just stab this syringe in here and try to draw the fluid out this way, if it was long enough, they're almost pressurized negatively where it keeps sucking the stopper back down. You can't seem to draw out the fluid, and the first time I ever responded to an overdose, it took me 2 minutes to try to fill up the syringe, and all I needed to do was tip it upside down and bring the syringe up to draw the fluid out. Now let's say the fluid was in there. All I would do is just kind of hold it like a cigarette. You can do it that way. And if this was someone's leg, I just go like this. I push it in, and just like that. And you just go slow. You don't need to slam. Just go real slow, pushing it in. I actually prefer this method a little more, holding it in 3 or 4 fingers, because you can get a little more of a push. You don't have to go really hard. They're sharp. And then I can push it with my thumb, just like that. And so I can show that one more time, though, just stabbing it in there, turning it upside down, and then I'm going to make sure I know where it's at. The needle's right at that silver cap, and I draw it out. Now, what if I did something like that? You see how there's a, like let's say I put a ton of air in there. I pulled it back too far, and I got all this air floating around. All you do is you point the needle side up, and you see there's air from here to here. I just push it out a little bit. If a little squirts out, a little squirts out. Also, this is going in muscles, not veins. So if you get some air in them, not really going to harm them or kill them. Same thing. After I've injected that into somebody, 1 rescue breath every 5 seconds for 2 minutes. So give them another dose. And same thing what they say with this is, work your way down the leg or go from right to left. You can do arms too. I almost always do the leg because if I feel right here, I already feel bone, just barely touching it. I'd rather not have to worry and just stick this all the way in you. They don't feel it. They have no idea. And I forgot to mention that Naloxone only works on opioids. So if they were drunk, or they took some other drug, you didn't know what was going on, you're still going to be able to revive. Or it won't do any damage to them, and the paramedics, by the time they get there, will be able to figure out what's going on with that person. It causes no harm. It only acts on opioids. So if they woke up, why did you just stick me with a needle? I'm like, oh, I thought you overdosed. They wouldn't get sick. They wouldn't have a weird reaction. There's 1/100th of a chance they can have an allergic reaction, such as hives, swollen throat, things like that. Still give them the medication. Still going to be beneficial if it's an overdose. Another scary thing, we ever heard of xylazine? Any of you guys? They're cutting xylazine into fentanyl to make the high last longer. It's a horse tranquilizer. So you get an elephant tranquilizer and a horse tranquilizer all wrapped up in one. How sweet, right? This does not work on xylazine. That's not an opioid, and people can overdose on xylazine. Paramedics will have to deal with that when they get there. Be careful too, xylazine can cause wounds. People are walking around with muscles and bones exposed because it causes infections in the skin that can't heal, and so people kind of like crocodile, if anyone knows when that was around. There's a drug called crocodile. It's eating people's skin, very similar to that. Except it's not eating them, it's just an infection that won't heal. Yeah, and so you keep doing this until someone wakes up. Like I said, it can take a couple minutes, up to 15, 20 minutes. They may not wake up till paramedics get there. Wide gambit of reactions that can happen. One is like what I call the breath of life. They shoot straight up and they just look bewildered, and it's all of a sudden they just remember how to breathe and oxygen hits them. They sit up, and 1 minute, remember this, 1 minute they were high, maybe with their friends having fun. The next minute they're surrounded by paramedics, police officers, or some stranger who's been hitting them with a needle or squirting stuff up their nose. And so people can get very emotional. They deny overdosing when you tell them, I didn't use any drugs. I don't know what you're talking about. People start crying and apologizing profusely because it's such a scary experience. They feel very embarrassed. And then one that shouldn't deter you is sometimes people get a little aggressive, especially guys. You know, they wake up and some stranger's there. They see that a lot of times when people get high, their friends rob them before they take off. So their drugs are gone, their money's gone, their stuff's all spread out. They panic, or they see police officers, sober house managers, paramedics. They think they're in trouble. And so they may get up, do this kind of thing. They may get aggressive with you. So some of the things you can start to look for besides someone shooting up is the breathing starts to normalize. All of a sudden, instead of like their chest not going up and down, it's going up and down in a normal pattern. That color discoloration, you start to see rosiness in their cheeks again. Then you just take a step or two back and just wait. Wait for them to wake up and then talk to them. If they're unresponsive and you woke them up, maybe from some blunt force trauma or being under the influence of other drugs, you want to roll them on their left-hand side. And what that looks like is the recovery position. So that's just their knee and their arm on their side like this. And that's in case once we're sure they're breathing again, if they get sick or throw up or something, they're not choking on it on their back. And so, whole wide reaction, variety of reactions that can happen for the person. And don't let any of them be a reason to do that. This is also not your time to insert your recovery conversation. You really messed up, man. You should go back to treatment. They're not hearing you right now. Big reason why is that it puts people in something called precipitated withdrawal. So they get the maximum effects of opioid withdrawal in a minimum amount of time. And so they'll wake up and they may be a little happy, a little high at first, and then within 5 or 10 minutes they start to notice that something's off. They're getting hot flashes, cold flashes, massive cravings, restless arms, restless legs, diarrhea, constipation, you name it, and they're blaming you. So don't expect someone to say, "Thank you so much for saving my life." They're going to more likely say, "Why the heck did you ruin your high? I was completely fine. I wasn't overdosing. Why did you do this to me? Now I'm going to have a big hospital bill." There's a lot of things they say. You did the right thing. You saved a life. Dead people can't recover. Dead people don't get a second chance at life. And dead people don't get to spend more time with their family members and loved ones. And so you gave someone a chance regardless of how upset they are. I always tell them, too, when they're looking for their drugs, even if you use those, it won't work for 30 to 90 minutes. It will literally block their receptors. This could also be the catalyst, the event that causes someone to decide, I want help, I want to go to treatment, I want to find a way to change my life, those sort of things. And so you may, if you know the person, talk to them a day or two later, just make sure they're okay that day. So that's what I got for the presentation.